Today it's approaching 10% of our GDP. MTN is half of that. So you're talking about 5% of your GDP, possibly. You're talking about 5% of your non-oil taxes. You're talking about, I mean, of all taxes paid in Nigeria, 5%. You're talking about 11% of all the non-oil taxes paid in Nigeria. So this is a big deal. Now, then contextualize with global expense. So a global investor asks himself, okay, MTN must have done something wrong. But what's the proportionality of the punishment to the fine? So it looks at other economies. I'm told, I've done some research on this, I'm told the largest fine ever imposed in telecoms anywhere else in the world is $100 million on AT&T in the United States. AT&T is multiples the size of MTN. The US telecoms market is multiples the size of the Nigerian telecoms market. So $100 million by the US Federal Communications Commission on AT&T, $5 billion or $3.9 billion on MTN in Nigeria.
But are you considering the offense that they're accused of? The weight of that offense?
It must be severe, but clearly, okay, so let's relate the fine to the size of the company's operations. Are you trying to bankrupt the company? Are you sanctioning them, or do you want to destroy the company? Because it is clear to me, as a financial analyst, that MTN doesn't have the capacity to pay that fine.
While we're looking at the regulatory overkill and excesses, have we looked at the angle of negotiations between the investor and the authorities of the country, of Nigeria? So we're looking at non-oil sector here.
I'm not privy to the private discussions between MTN and the NCC, but we do know publicly that there's been a concerted attempt at negotiation. We all know that now the matter is in court. That's probably a good thing. Let the courts decide. My concern as an analyst is that if you're talking about a non-oil sector, and in the context of Nigeria's non-oil sector, let me tell you the three star sectors in Nigeria's non-oil sector over the last decade. Clearly, telecoms is number one. It's grown from 0.something% of our GDP to 10%. The information and communication sector, which telecoms dominates, includes you, by the way, broadcaster and media is in that whole information and communication space. But telecoms dominates that sector. And that's now 10% of our economy. This could endanger that, I have no doubt, because like I said, MTN is 50% of that. Then you have real estate. And the sector of real estate, which has also gone to about 8–9% of GDP, the element of GDP, real estate, that is booming is the retail mall space. That is also challenged by FX policies, because the retail mall space sits on trade, which sits on international trade, Forex. That's also challenged. And then you have manufacturing, which is also challenged. Same issues, power, but also FX for many of them to get their inputs. So in a year in which we're talking about the non-oil sector, the three-star non-oil economies of our economy are challenged. We need to carefully reflect on the appropriateness of our strategy in the context of the realities of those sectors. There's a fourth non-oil sector that is key, that's agriculture, but that's a long journey.
Nobody's even looking at entertainment.
Entertainment is also there, but it's probably not large enough in the biggest chunks of contribution. So all of those, we need to remember this context, the fact that, like I said, our primary reliance on oil is endangered. The three stars are the telecoms, the real estate, the manufacturing, the CBN. I'm happy you had them here earlier today. Think about those three sectors in the context of 2016 and the imperative of building a non-oil sector. And think about regulation, the NCC, those in the housing sector, the power sector, and all of that. And our whole objective as a country should be, how do we stimulate this sector?
Especially seeing that the budget of 2016 is weighing heavily towards that angle where they talk about diversification.
So when we talk about diversification, one of the I think the inadvertent mistakes we are making, because I do agree with the budget. The budget's basic operating philosophy is we need growth. We need to stimulate this economy, and we need to diversify in a period in which we are otherwise constrained from oil, which we have relied on. But we are now taking a government-led approach while inadvertently undermining the private sector in those segments. Now, take the central bank. So the central bank, all the central bank needs is for dollar inflows to come into this economy. It's irrelevant to the central bank whether it is income from oil or dollar investment or turmoil of remittances or whatever. But guess what? We've clamped down on investments. We've turned that to zero. So the central bank has an even bigger challenge now looking for dollars. And that's part of why you have restrictions on dollars. So we could fund dollar inflows into this economy through investments rather than not just only through the sale of crude or other things.
You said we've clamped down on investments.
Inadvertently.
Your example, will a fine on MTN mean clamp down on investment?
I would suggest to you that in the eye of an investor, especially, remember I'm not objecting to fines or regulatory sanctions. I'm suggesting to you that based on every indices relating that fine to the size of their investment, relating it to their profits, relating it to their economic contributions, relating it to, I mean, that fine is almost equal to all the taxes that MTN has paid over an 11-year period. Come on.
Okay.
So the point is, it's proportionality. We're not debating regulatory activity. No investor worries about regulatory activity. Like you said, the U.S. banking regulator fines banks. But I've checked some of those indices, and there was an excellent report done recently by WSTC Financial Services, which contextualized those fines from all markets in relation to the income of the entities, in relation to the size of the industry, in relation to the size of the business, the company. This one is clearly in a class of its own. It stands out.
All right. We'll wait and see how that will play out. But in closing, how really can we sustain, national growth in non-oil sector?
So like I said, the non-oil sector, there's some critical elements. If you look at the last decade, Agric is important. We started the reforms there under Akin Adesina. I think they need to go on because that's a long journey. It's a 10-year reform process so that we can improve the value chain in agriculture, so that agriculture can lead to agro-processing and lead to manufacturing and create jobs in that segment. But then we have these three sectors that we must preserve. The ICT space, it is the telecoms that is the underpinning of e-commerce. It underpins even broadcasting. It underpins financial services, cards and payments, all of that. We need to continue to empower that space. Real estate and investments in that space. We need manufacturing. I'm happy about some of the things I'm hearing around power from the Minister, Fashola. So we need power to empower manufacturing, to empower the rest of the economy, the non-oil economy. So we need all of those reforms, but we should be careful, especially in this season, to protect those non-oil sectors.
Thank you very much, Mr. Opeyemi Agbaje, CEO of RTC Advisory Services. Thank you for speaking with us.
A pleasure.
Sunrise will take a moment and we will be back. We'll be going towards politics this time. Don't go away.